Hi, I'm Raghi Omar, and this is Young British and Muslim. We're going to be discussing some of the most talked about topics and hear stories of inspiring young British Muslims making a difference. And you can join the conversation at #YBMITV on Twitter. But do keep it clean, friendly and respectful. Now, each week we'll discuss a topic with the help of 3 guests here with me in the studio. And here's who's with us this week. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about something that British Muslims are becoming the victim of in growing numbers: Islamophobia. But what exactly is Islamophobia? Well, this week, a cross-party group of MPs have released a report after months of speaking to people across the country to try and define it in a bid to tackle the problem head-on. In doing so, they say they have discovered the scale of Islamophobic attacks in the UK. So, just how big is the problem? Well, in the last year, just over half of all victims of recorded religious hate crimes were Muslim. A new survey of people across the UK found 47% think Britain is becoming less tolerant of Muslims, and it suggests nearly 3 in 5 adults think Islamophobia is a problem. Well, joining me to talk about this important subject are 3 key young British Muslims: Fatima Diriye, Miqdad Versi and Akila Ahmed. Welcome to all of you. It's a great pleasure to have you here to discuss, well, let's face it, a topic that's been in the news for months, if not sort of years. But this week, the All-Parliamentary Group on British Muslims have defined it. But before we get on to that, I just want to get your personal experiences of what Islamophobia means to you. I mean, let's start with you, Fatima.
I think, to me, Islamophobia is something that we deal with on a day-to-day. I think that's within our workplaces, within the way people interact with you, within university, within the classroom, what I feel like I'm allowed to say, what I can't say, or even just going on public transport, whether that's if it was after a terrorist attack, whether I'm allowed to carry a big bag, or whether I have to be careful of what I say, or just even the clothing, the way I dress.
So it's an everyday reality from the minute you wake up, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Would that be fair to say?
I think that's exactly the same with me. I think also what you see, whether it's on the newspaper stands, whether you see it on the TV, when you actually experience it in different ways, sometimes quite subtly and sometimes more overtly. And all of these seem to be building up into a more institutional and structural problem in many sections of society. And I think that's the breadth of it is something that I see quite worrying.
Is that fair reflection, Akila, that it's not just on the streets, in the tube, in campuses, it's in the workplace, it's in the TV, it's pretty prevalent? Is that what you think?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, it's really prevalent. I've worked with Muslim women around the UK, and they would speak to me about how Islamophobia affects their everyday lives, and not only their lives, but their lives of their children as well. We're seeing Islamophobia in the playgrounds at school, in the classroom, on the playing field, but it's termed as banter, and unfortunately schools don't know how to deal with it.
Miqdad and Akila, you worked on this report of the All-Parliamentary Group. Are you happy with it? I mean, what was that experience like, and what kind of people did it talk to? I mean, was it just British Muslims, or did it go much farther, wider and deeper in terms of all aspects of people from society that it talked to and got evidence from?
I think that it went quite broadly. It went to different places across the country. It talked to academics who are Muslim and those who were not Muslim, who've looked at this area from a sociological perspective. It talked to real people who've experienced Islamophobia in different ways. And it's done its own research. So it's quite a broad-ranging report. And in particular, it's come up with a definition which I think is starting to encapsulate the breadth of Islamophobia, recognizing that it's actually a type of racism that's targeting Muslims and Muslimness in different ways.
Well, let me actually now come to that definition, which the parliamentary group says Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. Are you all happy with that definition? Do you think it's accurate?
Yeah. I think on a day-to-day, especially normally if I'm wearing a jilbab, which is like the headscarf that goes from head to toe, I see the way people interact with me completely different. So when I'm speaking to like a random stranger in the shop, I have to be extra polite, extra happy to allow people to feel like I'm human in some way or form. And if I'm dressed like this, people are more likely or more inclined to speak to me or have friendly conversations. So I'm really happy with that definition.
Akila?
I think the report has gone to great lengths to consult communities, and it's the first of its kind that has done that. There have been definitions in the past, but they've not, consulted with grassroots communities and academics, and also bodies outside of the Muslim communities. I mean, there are people who submitted evidence who disagreed with having a definition of Islamophobia, but they've taken those perspectives into account as well.
Well, why is it important? I mean, there is a definition of anti-Semitism. Why do you think there needs to be this definition of Islamophobia? Why do we need it as British Muslims?
I think it's very important that we recognize the reality of what Muslims face. Some people think it's merely anti-Muslim hatred. What this is a recognition that it is far beyond that. There are issues to do with structural issues, structural racism, which is part of the idea that many others face. And I think that we need to also de-exceptionalize Muslims. Muslims aren't different from other people who are facing this form of racism. It is very, very similar in the manifestations of it compared to how other actual races are being treated. And I think that what this definition tries to do is very much align the experiences of Muslims, whether it comes to verbal abuse, physical abuse, hate in different ways, discrimination, or structural racism, with the experiences, the lived experiences of many others who face that racism. And I think that's why this definition is very important.
Go on, Akila, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that we know, research has shown us that if you have a Muslim-sounding name, you're less likely to be called for a job interview. If you wear a hijab to an interview, you're less likely to get a job. So from a very basic point of view, not having a definition of Islamophobia is a hindrance to organisations, for example, like businesses, to formulate, policies around Islamophobia, best working practices about how to deal with those types of structural racism. It's a hindrance to government, it's a hindrance to schools. We need a basic definition of Islamophobia as a starting point
to deal with this,
yeah.
to get institutions in this country to deal with it in the way that it deals with other forms of racism, be it anti-Semitism or anything else.
And I think that the fact that it's talking about racism, it means that there's already this history or understanding of what racism is. There are already policies in place as to what is racism and how to deal with it. What this Islamophobia definition does is very much root it within that discourse, so that people who start talking about these issues and saying, well, what is racism when it comes to Muslims? Well, you've got an idea of racism, you know how this works, how it manifests itself. That's exactly what this is trying to do.
Let me put, play devil's advocate. This shouldn't be surely a definition that, closes off a religion from critiques or criticism. This is not what we're talking about, right?
That's exactly right, and I think that's why it's really good that the definition makes that clear. It talks very much about it being a type of racism.
Yeah.
It does not talk about criticizing Islam. Anyone can criticize Islam in a non-racist way. If you do it in a racist way, that's different.
Okay.
And that's the key thing that matters.
That's the key thing. Fatima?
I agree. I think the issue is just the way it interacts with you on a day-to-day. So I think critiquing Islam is one thing, but I think in the way that your violence the way I'd be more prone to violence if I'm like walking on the street after a hate attack, or if someone's asking me about a terrorist attack and why did your people do this, then either I have to answer for that, and it starts prejudicing a whole group of people rather than talking about the incident as an isolated thing.
Well, let's talk about, incidences, and it's fair to say that as British Muslim women, you're much more likely, evidence shows, to be at the forefront of this kind of Islamophobia. What have been your personal experiences? I'll start with you, Akila.
So I think the hate kind of incidents I've experienced are kind of really sort of every day. I've experienced so many for me to kind of sum up. But, there's a couple that stand out, and usually they happen when I'm with my children. So once I was in the car with my daughter and my son, who was a baby, and a man was in another car, and there was no altercation, and he stuck two fingers up at me, and I sort of said, I don't know what's going on. And the only reason I could sort of fathom for him doing that was because he saw that I wear a hijab. He then became, when I sort of, I took a picture of him basically, he became very aggressive, started threatening and swearing and all sorts basically, and I reported that to the police. But I also experienced a lot of hatred online. So I have a kind of relatively small profile, public profile online, and I will often be targeted by far-right trolls and other types of trolls.
You've made some, I mean, there was one tweet that you made about Tommy Robinson, and that started a deluge from his supporters. Didn't
Yeah, it created a pylon. I was receiving thousands of tweets, and all of them, you know, very vitriolic. I was told to go back to rape gangland, to go back to Saudi Arabia. I was called a whore. I was called other words which are much more rude and horrendous. And in a way, it's if you're online and you're a Muslim woman who's identifiably Muslim, it's par for the course.
Fatima, you've had some experiences at university on campuses, haven't you? I mean, here in London.
Yeah, I think also just to add on to that, I've also had like online abuse as well. And I'm really sorry to hear about that. And I've had like similar things, people calling me whore and telling me to go back to Mecca. And I think a lot of them tend to be really racialized. So people were saying, calling me an ape, I'm trying to be transphobic and call me a man. And I think also on a day-to-day, I think there was a few times when some Eastern European men were like trying to run up to me and be like, you're a terrorist. And then I didn't know what to do in that moment of time because I was walking late after university and just trying to get home. So then I quickly crossed the street and then just prayed that I'd be okay. But at that point, I didn't report because I just felt like the best thing for me to try to do is try to get home safe. And another altercation happened to me at university where I was in the library and I was studying, and these two men who started taking pictures of me and started drawing an explicit picture of me with the quote that I like penis, and were justifying everything that's happened, and were saying that I was in the wrong for complaining, and then took this further and said they're going to start a law case against me. And then I ended up reporting this to the university, and then all that happened was the university responded to me telling me that I was in the wrong. I interpreted this however I wanted to. They don't deem this to be Islamophobic. When all the cases were there because of the pictures that they drew was very explicit because it drew my headscarf. And yeah, it was really overwhelming.
The university would react in that way. I mean, that's...
I think the unfortunate thing about it was the students on the ground were really supportive. They understood how important it was. The student union was supporting me the whole way through. The problem was the university just didn't deem it adequate enough to deal with it.
So Mikdad, I mean, when you criticise the media, what do you think that we are getting wrong?
I think that there are different areas where there are problems. The most worrying of those is basic due diligence and getting the facts right. In the last 18 months, for example, there have been over 50 examples where newspapers have made factual errors and they've admitted those errors and have changed it. Forget about the ones that they haven't admitted are wrong. And that demonstrates the scale of the problem, in particular within certain sections of the right-wing tabloid press, but also more broader in society. And I think that what we have to recognize is it's not just accuracy in fact, but also the way that you frame something.
Are things changing there? Because you've said that, I mean, some, tabloids, some tabloid editors have taken, trying to turn the leaf.
I think that there are definitely examples where things have got a lot better. In particular, where there's been engagement with those managing editors, those discussions have helped frame that discussion. But I still see, even from the very good managing editors who have a strong liberal understanding of how to engage with different sections of communities across society, even within those newspapers where things are better, you still see things slipping through the net. And I just hope that there's an understanding that we can't let this go on forever.
Look, one of the things that we have been trying to do on this show is highlighting inspirational people from around the country who are achieving great things in areas we don't often hear about. And this week we bring you the story of an artist from Birmingham whose work has taken him around the world.
I might be an artist of Muslim faith, but I'm also an artist, just an artist really, just a human being creating art for everybody. I'm born and raised in Birmingham, I'm born and raised in the UK. I'm of Muslim faith. My parents migrated from Bangladesh in the late 50s. I can wear many different hats, and I think I'm very fortunate in that way that I can draw from so many different places. The power of graffiti art for me is the accessibility of it, the fact that this was art for the people. This was art that was literally spilling outside of the conventional gallery spaces and actually spilling out into the places where we live, or the places where we use every day, the cities we live in. It was literally the city speaking. My faith as a Muslim has always been kind of paramount to the work that I do. It gave me my initial focus in trying to wrestle with this idea of art for art's sake, or me as an artist having a kind of purpose with my art. What can it do? Art has the power to be able to say things society is unable to say. I want to see community leaders, policymakers, city authorities, academics, activists, and artists at the same table, so we can say, listen, we're in this together. I think looking back in time a little bit into my own career as an artist, one moment comes to mind really when I felt quite proud really in being invited to on a TEDx platform, the first TEDx that was taking place in the Vatican State.
The sounds that you're about to hear.
So for me as a Muslim,
While you experience this.
born in Birmingham, in the Vatican State, as a graffiti artist, telling my story and sharing what I do, it was quite a surreal experience and something I reflect on, and it's stories I'll be telling to my grandchildren about the day I was invited to the Vatican to spray graffiti. Me growing up, seeing a positive reflection of faith and being Muslim through creativity. We didn't find it of someone who was comfortable with their identity as in this society and saying, yeah, I'm Muslim, in a very confident way, in a very in-your-face way. Yeah, this is who we are, and what? Being the son of an immigrant, having to really kind of wrestle with this idea that of, you know, my father seeing himself as a visitor here. That, some of that kind of me inheriting some of that baggage, if you like, of trying to understand, I'm born and raised here, but my father speaks about going back, whereas the later generations, at least on that level, there perhaps will be less and less of that. Looking back at the start, when I first started, there were very few creatives in the Muslim communities. Things have certainly changed since then, and it's actually refreshing to see how now there's a whole wealth of kind of Muslim creatives across the globe now.
So Muhammad Ali, the graffiti artist known as Aerosol Arabic. Do you think one of the other issues about Islamophobia and countering it is highlighting, role models to counter this kind of issue? Do you think that's very small part of the solution?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, trying to get those positive stories out there about how British Muslims are contributing to society, to life, how they're just normal like any other person in the UK, and they've got the same kind of concerns, whether it's about school or employment or whatever it is. I think that's really, really important. And we are seeing more of these kind of role models come up. I mean, it's great. We've got Nadia Hussain, who won the Bake Off, Moeen Ali, the cricketer, Mo Farah. And then we've got more sort of local heroes coming up as well. And it is really important.
Fatima, what do you think could be also part of this sort of, beginnings of a sort of, solution or even resolution of this issue? What do you feel? What do you want to see?
I think as a whole, especially with everything within the media, and I think just basically navigating your daily life, I think Muslim creatives keep doing great work right now. I think a lot of them are like reclaiming their own narratives and trying to figure out what does it mean to be Muslim for themselves. I think usually we tend to internalize this Islamophobia and have this constant fear of what they should be portraying themselves as, how they should try to exist in the world. And like myself, I do poetry, so I think seeing things like that is really useful. And there's loads of like groups where people just meet up, like the London poetry laureates. Two of them were like Somali and they were Muslim as well. And allowing them to have this space to be able to just exist, I think is such a powerful tool to allow Muslims, just like myself, to be able to just navigate and also just find their own voices without feeling like they were bonded with what they should stereotypically be.
And Migdal, what do you want, now that this report is out and it's given a definition, from Parliament, what follow through do you want to see beyond this report just gathering dust?
I think what's really important is that, firstly, any definition of racism in different ways needs to be owned by communities. Communities need to be, this is something that we as Muslim communities need to have as part of us, as part of our daily lives in terms of how we interact and use it. But I think that more important than the personal views of direct individuals, it's also about institutional and the government taking this on board, adopting the reality that Islamophobia is a type of racism and dealing with it as a result. And I think that there has been a long lack of action, in my opinion, within certain sections of government in terms of acting on the real rise of Islamophobia that's happened. The fact that we've had a 40% rise in the last year of hate crime against Muslims. We want there to be action taken, and hopefully this can be a spur for that action.
Let me ask you, now that this report is out to all three of you, is there a sense in which you're hopeful going forward? Fatima?
I feel like this is at least going to be a start to have more productive conversations on the ground. I think especially because of the report that has been able to be put forward now, I think we'll be able to at least move forward. And hopefully this is something that we can use to try to organise against Islamophobia more widely.
Mikdad?
I think that we always have to be hopeful, and there are definitely green shoots out there. There's definitely things going in the right direction. But we also have to be recognizing of the scale of the problem that we're facing. And whilst it's important to be hopeful, to recognize that Europe and America also make us look very worried in many respects, and we've got quite a good deal here, there's a long way until Muslims are being treated equally. So whilst being hopeful, also being realistic as to the challenges we're facing.
Akila?
As a government advisor on Islamophobia, I've been working with government and agencies to try and address Islamophobia. We've worked with Transport for London, British Transport Police, to help them better deal with hate crimes on transport, worked with the Department of Education to get a better sense of the extent of Islamophobic bullying in schools. And a couple of years ago, nationally, across all police forces, they started to flag Islamophobia as a distinct hate crime in the way that anti-Semitism is flagged. These are all good steps. However, I think with a definition of Islamophobia, these agencies, government, they will be able to take even further steps to address it. So I am hopeful, I'm always hopeful. There is a lot of work to be done, but I think we need to have a whole range of solutions at community level and also at policy level as well.
Okay, well, that's it for this episode. If you haven't done so already, let us know what you think using the hashtag YBMITV. And thanks to my guests, to Fatima Diriye, to Mikdad Versi, and to Akil Ahmed. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you.